Earle Leonard Nelson. May 12, 1897 to January 13, 1928, also known as the Gorilla Man, the Gorilla Killer, and the Dark Strangler, was an American serial killer, rapist, and necrophile who killed at least 20 women in various U.S. states and 2 in Canada between 1926 and 1927. He is perhaps the first known serial sex murderer of the 20th century. Earle Nelson was born Earle Leonard Farrell on May 12, 1897, in San Francisco, California, the son of an Iowa-born mother of Danish and Irish descent, Frances Nelson, and a father whose ancestry was Jewish, James Carlos Farrell. Both of his parents died of syphilis before he reached 2 years of age. Nelson was subsequently sent to live with his maternal grandmother, Jenny Nelson, a devout Pentecostal who raised him alongside her 2 younger children, Willis and Lillian, who were 10 and 8 years his senior, respectively. Nelson exhibited self-loathing and other morbid behavior at a young age and was expelled from the Agassiz Primary School in San Francisco at age 7. Around age 10, he collided with a streetcar while riding his bicycle and remained unconscious for 6 days. After he awoke, Nelson's behavior became erratic, and he suffered from frequent headaches and memory loss. Described as a psychotic prodigy, Nelson exhibited increasingly bizarre, manic behaviors in his childhood, such as talking to imaginary people, compulsively quoting biblical passages, and watching female family members undress. His grandmother noted occasions where Nelson would go to school in freshly cleaned clothes and return home in rags, as though he had exchanged clothes with a homeless person. Nelson's strong religious upbringing remained a pervasive influence in his life, and he obsessively read the Book of Revelation as a teenager. In his early teenage years, Nelson began frequenting brothels and bars in San Francisco's Barbary Coast red light district and contracted a venereal disease. As he progressed through puberty, Nelson grew into a stocky, physically fit young man. He would sometimes entertain his family with his physical talents, such as walking on his hands or lifting heavy objects with his teeth. Nelson began his criminal activities at a young age and was sentenced to 2 years in San Quentin State Prison in 1915 after breaking into a cabin in rural Plumas County, which he believed had been abandoned. He was paroled for this offense on September 6, 1916, but was arrested again in Stockton on March 9, 1917 for petty larceny. Nelson spent another 6 months incarcerated before being discharged, after which he was arrested in Los Angeles on burglary charges. After spending approximately 5 months in Los Angeles County Jail, Nelson escaped. Sometime in late 1917, Nelson enlisted in the U.S. military, but deserted after 6 weeks. He repeated this pattern on several occasions, enlisting in different military branches under different names before deserting. In 1918, Nelson was committed to the Napa State Mental Hospital after behaving oddly and erratically during one of his brief stints in the United States Navy. A Navy psychologist noted that Nelson was living in a constitutional psychotic state, February to November 1926, California, Portland, and Seattle. Clara Newman, a San Francisco landlady, was Nelson's first documented victim. Nelson began his killing spree early in 1926. His first known victim was Clara Newman, a wealthy 60-year-old San Francisco landlady. Nelson entered her boarding house at 2037 Pierce Street on February 20, 1926, posing as a potential tenant named Roger Wilson. Sometime after entering the home, Nelson strangled Newman before raping her dead body and hiding her corpse in a vacant apartment in the house. His second victim, 63-year-old Laura Beale, was strangled in her home in nearby San Jose on March 2nd. The silken cord that had been used to strangle Beale had reportedly been wound so tightly around her neck that it had embedded in her flesh. Beata Withers, Nelson's sixth victim, and the first of several he killed in Portland, Oregon. In the fall of 1926, Nelson relocated to Portland, Oregon, where he raped and murdered 35-year-old landlady Beata Withers on October 19th, her body found by her teenage son, stuffed beneath clothing inside a steamer trunk in the attic of her home. The following day, 59-year-old Virginia Grant was murdered in a vacant property she owned on East 22nd Street. her body hidden behind the home's basement furnace. On October 21st, landlady Mabel Fluke disappeared from her home in Portland. Her body was discovered several days later in the attic, strangled with a scarf. Despite the subsequent similar murders of Grant and Fluke, a coroner's jury of 4 men and 2 women was appointed on October 28th to evaluate the mysterious death of Withers. The jury's decision was split in half, with 3 believing her death was a suicide and the other 3 believing it murder. December 1926 to April 1927. Midwest and East Coast. Nelson murdered Germania Harpin and her infant son on December 27, 1926. This marked his first and only murder of a male victim and of a young child. After leaving Portland in late November 1926, Nelson moved eastward, hitchhiking or stowing away on trains. On December 23rd, the body of Elmira Berard, 41, was found inside her Council Bluffs, Iowa home. She had been garroted with a shirt. Initially, local police presumed her death a suicide, as Berard had recently been discharged from a psychiatric institution. This was dismissed after it was discovered that she had been raped. Nelson's trial was scheduled to begin June 27, 1927, but postponed at the request of his attorney, and instead began on November 1st at the Winnipeg Law Courts building. The case was prosecuted by R.B. Graham and overseen by Justice Andrew Dysart. Nelson was the first serial murderer in American history whose crimes were subject to widespread media attention in newspapers, national magazines, and the then new medium of radio. His crimes and trial received international media attention, appearing in newspapers across the United States, Canada, and Australia. Nelson's confirmed murder count, which exceeded 20, remained a record high for nearly 50 years until the discovery of Juan Corona's crimes in 1971. According to crime historians Harold Schechter and David Everett, Nelson was the first serial sex murderer in 20th century America.